The day Dean Martin's heart stopped beating. Dean Martin didn't die on Christmas Day 1995. That's what the death certificate said, what the newspapers reported, what the world believed. But anyone who truly knew him understood the truth. The man who finally stopped breathing in his Beverly Hills bedroom that December morning had been dead for 8 years. His body had simply forgotten to lie down. The real Dean Martin, the one who laughed from his belly, who radiated warmth like the California sun, who made every room brighter just by walking into it. That man died on March 21st, 1987, on a frozen mountainside he never saw. He died the moment a phone call shattered his world and proved that all the fame, all the money, all the cool in the world meant absolutely nothing when you lose the one person who matters most. This isn't a story about a celebrity's death. This is about a father's soul being ripped from his chest in the 8-year walk to the grave that followed. To understand how completely Dean Martin was destroyed, you first need to understand what he lost. Dean Paul Martin, Dino Jr., to everyone who knew him, wasn't just Dean's son. He was Dean's masterpiece, his vindication, his proof that he'd done something right in a world built on illusion and pretense. Dino Jr. was everything. A tennis champion who competed at Wimbledon, an actor who starred in films and television shows, a musician with his own rock band, Dino, Desi, and Billy. But above all, he was a pilot, not just any pilot, but a captain in the California Air National Guard, flying F-4 Phantom jets at speeds that broke the sound barrier. For Dean, who spent decades playing the lovable drunk on stage while being a devoted family man off stage, Dino represented validation. He was living proof that Dean Martin had contributed something meaningful to the world beyond entertainment. They were more than father and son. They were kindred spirits. They golfed together, joked together, understood each other without needing words. Dean, famous for keeping everyone at arm's length behind a wall of effortless cool, let those walls down completely for Dino. His son was the only person who saw the real man beneath the tuxedo in the martini glass. When Dean looked at Dino, he saw his own immortality. He saw a better version of himself, someone who wasn't just famous, but genuinely accomplished. Someone serving his country with honor. Dino was the anchor that kept Dean grounded when Hollywood's emptiness threatened to swallow him whole. "That's my boy," Dean would say, pointing to photos of Dino in his flight suit. "He flies jets. I just sing songs." It sounded like a humble brag, but it was the truest statement Dean ever made. He revered his son, and that reverence is what made March 1987 not just a tragedy, but a complete spiritual annihilation. March 21st, 1987 began like any ordinary Saturday in Los Angeles. But in the San Bernardino Mountains, something deadly was brewing. A freak snowstorm was building around Mount San Gorgonio, Southern California's highest peak. Thick clouds, blinding snow, and howling winds created conditions that turned the sky into a death trap. Captain Dean Paul Martin and his weapons systems officer, Captain Ramon Ortiz, were scheduled for routine training that afternoon. They would be flying an F-4C Phantom, a powerful machine capable of supersonic speeds. But on this particular day, nature held all the cards. They took off from March Air Force Base in the early afternoon. The mission was standard, a departure procedure taking them up through cloud layers toward the desert. Simple, routine, safe. Dean Martin was at home in Beverly Hills, probably watching television, maybe sipping a drink, completely unaware that 60 miles away, his entire world was about to collapse. At 1:52 p.m., Dino's jet requested permission from air traffic control to turn left, avoiding the massive storm clouds blocking their path. The controller approved the maneuver, but in the confusion of the storm, amid the whiteout conditions that erased all visual reference points and turned the world into a featureless void, something went catastrophically wrong. The jet, traveling at over 400 miles per hour, didn't turn away from the mountain. It turned directly into it. Mount San Gorgonio is unforgiving, a wall of granite and ice rising over 11,000 feet. In the blinding snow, Dino wouldn't have seen it coming until the final impossible second. There would have been no time for fear, no time for anything. One moment they were flying, the next there was only impact and darkness. The jet struck the sheer granite face at high velocity. The explosion would have been instant, muffled by heavy snow, a silent fireball quickly extinguished by the blizzard. Back in Beverly Hills, the phone hadn't rung yet. Dean was safe, calm, unaware. He didn't feel the disturbance in the universe. He didn't know that his golden boy had just been erased from existence. But the call was coming. The radar blip vanished from screens at March Air Force Base. Controllers called out, "Phantom 6, come in. Phantom 6, do you read?" Nothing, just static. And in that static lived the nightmare that would consume Dean Martin until his last breath. The news didn't come immediately. It started as concern, a delayed return, a missing aircraft. But when the phone finally rang at Dean's house, the voice wasn't Dino's. It was an official from the Air National Guard. "Mr. Martin, your son's plane is missing." Those are the most terrifying words any parent can hear. Missing implies hope but carries the weight of doom. For the next 3 days, Dean Martin descended into a personal hell. The storm on the mountain was so severe that search and rescue teams couldn't reach the crash site. Helicopters were grounded. Ground crews were turned back by avalanches and zero visibility. Dean sat in his living room and fell apart. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He chain-smoked pack after pack, the blue haze around him matching the darkness in his soul. He stared at the telephone as if sheer willpower could make it ring with good news. He imagined scenarios. Maybe Dino had ejected. Maybe he was wrapped in his parachute, cold but alive, waiting for rescue. Dean clung to these fantasies like a drowning man clutching debris. Friends came by. Frank Sinatra visited. Sammy Davis Jr. called. Jerry Lewis reached out, but Dean barely spoke to them. He was in a trance of agony. The king of cool had become a terrified father trembling in his pajamas. He paced the floor for hours, walking miles on expensive carpets, muttering prayers he hadn't said since childhood in Ohio. "Please, God, take everything. Take the money. Take the fame. Just give me my boy. Just give me my boy." But God wasn't bargaining that week. The storm raged on, covering the mountain in white, hiding the wreckage and the truth. Every hour without news was torture. The not knowing was a razor blade slicing through Dean's sanity. He would pour a drink, look at it, and set it down untouched, feeling guilty for even considering comfort while his son might be suffering. On the third day, the weather finally broke. Search helicopters lifted off and spotted the scar on the granite face. They found the wreckage. There was no parachute. There were no survivors. When confirmation came that Dino was gone, that he'd died instantly on impact, Dean didn't scream. He didn't throw things. He simply collapsed inward, as if the strings holding him together had been cut. The light in his eyes, that mischievous twinkle that had charmed the world for 40 years, flickered out and died. He hung up the phone and sat in his favorite chair, staring at a blank television screen. The silence in the room was deafening. It was the sound of a heart breaking beyond repair. The funeral was a blur of black limousines, weeping celebrities, and military honors. A folded American flag, taps played on a lonely bugle. Dean Martin was there physically, but spiritually he was miles away, buried on that mountain with his son. He moved like a robot. He wore dark glasses, not to look cool, but to hide eyes that were swollen and lifeless. People offered comfort. "He died a hero. He didn't suffer." Dean nodded politely, but he heard nothing. All he could hear was the silence where his son's laughter used to be. At the graveside, Dean looked decades older than his years. The vitality that had defined him was gone, replaced by gray, hollow fragility. He touched the casket, a gentle, lingering touch, as if tucking Dino in for the night one last time. Witnesses say he whispered something, but no one heard what. Maybe, "I love you." Maybe, "Wait for me." After the funeral, Dean retreated into his fortress on Mountain Drive. He shut the gates. He stopped returning calls. He stopped going out. The world wanted Dean Martin back, but Dean Martin didn't want the world. He felt betrayed by life. He'd played by the rules, worked hard, provided for his family, entertained millions. And this was his reward? Burying his child? It made no sense. It was a cruel joke, and for the first time in his life, Dean didn't find the joke funny. He began shedding the trappings of stardom. He didn't care about records or ratings anymore. He sat in his room watching old westerns on loop. Why westerns? Because in westerns, the good guys won. In westerns, death had meaning. In westerns, the world was simple. The complex, painful reality of 1987 was too much to bear. He became a ghost in his own life, drifting from room to room, carrying the invisible burden of grief that pressed on his shoulders like the granite of San Gorgonio. A year later, in 1988, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. tried to save him. They saw their friend fading away, dying of a broken heart, and devised a plan, a massive reunion tour. Together again. The Rat Pack back on stage, filling stadiums, reliving the glory.